In part 3 of the 2022 Canes opponent preview series, we're going to preview the 2022 Texas A&M Aggies, our opponent out in College Station, Texas on September 17th. Let's put it this way. When you look at A&M, this is the team many think will be what Georgia was last year or LSU in 19, or the SEC be that team that breaks through and be a championship team if it's not Bama. Now, take away COVID, a 9-1 A&M team deserved a spot in the playoffs, even with a light resume on wins. Let's put it this way. That's fewer than 4 losses. They've only done that once, and that was when Johnny Football was there back in 2012. But it had to replace everybody on that front six, and that offense has to be more explosive. And they're in a division with Bama, Auburn, LSU. That has to be great fast. And they play in the toughest division in all of college football, the SEC West. Now, let's assume there's no more surprises, i.e. the close call in Boulder last year. If that's true, A&M shouldn't be a problem. And they think they should be able to get by us on September 17th. The problem with that is they got Missouri and South Carolina last year from the East, and they won those 2 games by a score of 99-27. This year, it has to go to Columbia, and a better Florida team comes in, and they have a coaching change of their own. But that stretch they're going to have, us, Arkansas, and Jerry World, at Mississippi State, at Bama, at South Carolina, Ole Miss, Florida, at Auburn, and that doesn't include LSU to close the season. That schedule is brutal. I think that team's a year away. By next year, they're ready to rise up, and that team could be a real special team next year. Okay? Now, let's take a look at the preview here. Let's take a look at A&M here. Personally, I'm looking forward to seeing that A&M team up close and personal. Now, when you look at them, you want to find crazy fan bases. We thought we were crazy. Take a look at that fan base we'll be facing out in College Station in A&M. They've had the big, shiny, awesome presence for decades, and they couldn't unwrap them. A few text words now. Now, think about it. Everyone throws Texas as the program that's done the least with the most. But see, it has a national championship, 2005, and another title game appearance in the BCS/CFP era. The thing is, Texas has had everything to use, including being in the Big 12. And they're not in the SEC yet, and they won't be till 2025. See, but the reality is A&M is actually the one that has done the least with most. Not doing anything wrong. Let's be clear about that. You have to remember the possible argument when they went to the SEC from the Big 12 might have kept it from being in a playoff. But it has done everything right, and Jimbo's done it right. It got a national championship caliber head coach in Jimbo. It gave him all the resources. It gave him the financial stability, a 10-year plan to play the long game, so A&M could build everything up to the long-term success. And Jimbo's good. You can't argue with a guy who's gone 34-14 and won 3 big bowl games in 4 years. But he only has 1 year so far with fewer than 4 losses. That's nothing new for him. Okay? Last year they were 8-4. 23 of the last 26 seasons with 4 more losses. That's happened 23 out of 26 years for A&M. You lose 4 games at LSU, Georgia, or Florida, or Auburn, and Hugh Freeze pops up as some kind of coaching search. I mean, that's unfair to Jimbo. Okay? Let's be honest. They're getting the players. They just came up with, as we all know, one of the greatest recruiting classes in the history of college football. At least if you look at the projections. But so does Georgia, so does LSU, and so does Bama, bringing the big-time talent. And 3 of those has the last 3 titles. And let's to make things even more difficult for Jimbo. 6 of those SEC programs have a national championship, as I mentioned earlier, those 3. But so does Texas, Oklahoma, who will be joining the conference in 25, and A&M still hanging around with Vanderbilt, Ole Miss, and Kentucky in the no SEC championship appearance lounge. And that's a problem. Let's be clear on A&M. Everything's there for them. The coach, the talent, the money, the smarts, the will, the commitment, the fan base. The win over Bama's there. And living in Nick Saban's dome this offseason is also there. It's all there. Okay? The thing it has to do is win. They have to take a step. Bama's going to take a step back, and we all know they're going to do that at some point. But for right now, they just have to settle being in the SEC championship and being part of the college football playoff chase. That might not happen this year, but it's going to happen. Let's make no mistake. It's going to happen. Though, don't mention the word payoff with Texas A&M around Nick Saban because he has an issue with that. Let's look at the offense-defense breakdown of A&M. When you look at A&M, okay, the keys to the season for them, when you look at them, is the fact that they have to get the passing game going, stretch the field. Now, last year was okay. Not a lot of chances. They ain't take chances. That's got to change this year. They have an upgraded quarterback no matter who wins the job. They have we've had plenty of good moments, and Jaden Weidemeyer was a great talent. But considering the receivers they have in place, it's not necessarily a plus to have a tight end who was their leading receiver at 515 yards. They have the guys that can jet, and they have the passing game, which only averaged 12 yards per completion and 6.8 yards per pass. Compare that to when Kellen Mond was there in 2020, 7.8 yards per pass. He was a senior and he was in control. Last year, they were 5-0 when it averaged 7 yards or more per throw. When you look at defense, it's very simple. Let the kids play. Now, it's not an insane exaggeration, okay, to have half the teams in college football be ecstatic with having an all-freshman starting 11 from the defensive stars in this A&M class. But of course, not all of them are going to be elites. They're going to be bust along the way. Some will be overhyped. Some will be... But there's just too much skill and having too much talent not to come into that rotation this year. They have several 4- and 5-star guys who can gain a little bit of weight in the weight room. But considering the losses they've had on their D-line and the need for depth across the board, the faster they make a statement, the faster A&M gets to where they need to get to. Their key player is Hayes King or Max Johnson or Connor Wagman. You saw the spring game, you notice that position is still in flux. Will A&M finally get back to a national championship elite quarterback play under Jimbo? Now, let's be clear, Kellen Mond was great. Even when he was best. Was he Joe Burrow or Tua? No. Mond went to Minnesota. King was supposed to be the main man last year, but he got hurt. He only threw 35 passes. Zach Calzada ended up being the leading passer. Now he's at Auburn. Yes, he beat Bama, but again, he's at Auburn. King was a big-time recruit in 2020 with sprinter speed, and he had a solid arm. Now, a leg injury derailed his progress. Johnson's ready to win, and Weidman would have been the star in this year's class if it not for the defense. No matter who it is, that quarterback has to be great. And to that point, their key transfer is Max Johnson. Now, and this is by default, since they didn't do a lot in the transfer portal. Now, with Johnson coming to College Station, that was a little bit of an odd move there. But he's a proven playmaker, okay? He threw 35 TDs and just 7 picks in 2 years as in Baton Rouge. Now, he might not have the mobility Jimbo wants, but he's big, he has a good arm, and he's been through those wars in the SEC. Experience matters, especially in that conference. And by the way, he beat LSU last year. He beat A&M last year, I'm sorry. 306 yards, 3 touchdowns. The key game of the season, You notice they don't mention us. They mention the game after us, September 24th versus Arkansas in Jerry World. Now, of course, they'd rather beat Bama than anyone else. But the build-up to that game, they have to get by Arkansas. And Arkansas won 20-10 last year. And A&M followed that up with a loss to Mississippi State. Then, of course, they beat Alabama. They beat Bama. This time around, they have to go to Jerry World to deal with Arkansas, then Mississippi State, then go to Bama, then go to South Carolina after a bye week. You lose to Arkansas again, that was had a real bad tone and a real bad message. Let me give you a little bit of a fact. A&M had 39 sacks last year to just 19 for their opponents. Fumbles. Their opponents lost 5 fumbles and they fumbled 15 times. A&M fumbled 9 times. They lost 3 of them. In the first quarter, this is where Jimbo's offense does their damage. They outscored their opponents last year 107-53. Now, what happens next? It's a good question. Good question. Here's what happens next. When you look at A&M, it's been assumed, because we all know that. Let me see. Now, when you look at that, let's look at their analysis. Let's look at the analysis. And we close that out, and we'll close this out with that. That schedule, they open with Sam Houston, and they get App State before we go there September 17th. Then they go, after our game with them, they go to Arkansas. They go to Arlington to take on Arkansas. Then they're at Mississippi State, at Bama, then a bye week, and then at South Carolina. Ouch. Then they get Ole Miss and then the Gators November 5. Then they go to Auburn. Then they close with UMass and LSU at home. They don't get Georgia. They don't get Vanderbilt, but missing Georgia is a big deal. And that includes having to play the Gators, but that's in College Station. Let me tell you, that road schedule is brutal. Okay. Now, let's understand when we go there September 17th, before that, they won't lose to Sam Houston. They're very dangerous in the FCS, but then they come to App State. That's not a pushover, as we found out last year. But when we go September 17th to College Station, we'll have no expectations. And Mario has won on the road. If Tyler Van Dyke is going to have a Heisman season, this is the game he needs to have his coming out party. But with that being said, let's go to the rest of A&M's schedule. There's that mid-season stretch when they're on the road, but they'll balance out near the end. Going to Bama is brutal, and there's no margin for mistakes. If they finally want to get over the hump and get to Atlanta and eventually the playoff, beating Bama will be a big test. That will be a big challenge. When I look at that schedule, they should be at least, I don't think they'll be undefeated. I think we beat them September 17th, but I think going into that Bama game, they'll be 4-1 going into that Bama game. Lose that Bama game, 4-2. I think 10 wins is definitely doable for that team this year. I think they're a year away. I'm going to say for A&M, my prediction for them is 10-2 for 2022. In part 4 of the 2022 Canes opponent preview series, we will preview Middle Tennessee.